Jacqueline, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet and connect.
Yeah, same. So I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, this question, I hope I don't disappoint you because I'm definitely one of those weirdo people who don't have any clue what I said. I don't recall being in a space where I was told to dream about that
Mm.
or to focus on that. While it may sound a little drabby, no one let you dream about that. I think it actually served me in the long run because it did
Yeah.
pigeonhole me into saying, I want to be that. I need to.
Mm.
But I don't recall having a North Star around what I wanted to be when I was growing up, which is how I probably landed up being someone who started their first company in their early 20s and who has been in the entrepreneurial space ever since then. I can't point to one thing, and I actually don't have any regrets about that either.
Maybe that's, like you said, allowed you to be open
Mhm.
to what's come up for you. So, for those who don't know you, can you share a little bit about what you do today?
I operate as a leadership consultant for our company, Scarlet. And I love answering the question of what do I do because I get the opportunity of not pointing to the accolades and the trademarks and the podcasts and the books, although I'm proud of all those things. I really want my work to be representative of how I execute my life thesis. And so when I
Hmm.
say my life thesis, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, I would want nothing more with my life than for people to say that I help them start the things that they truly want to do and move to their next level of leadership. And everything that I do, from the podcast that I produce to the books that I've written, the clients that I decide to take and not take, the trademarks that our company owns, are all in service of that work. Both
Mm.
personally, that is something that's really important to me, and also professionally as well. And so I operate in a lot of different spaces, but all these spaces are in service of fulfilling that life thesis and hoping and
Mm.
a commitment to making impact in people's lives and directly at corporations as well.
Well, tell me, Jacqueline, how did you get here? How did you know that this was your life thesis? Was it a straight shot? Was it a winding road? She
I think
smiles.
you already know the answer.
I'm kind of leading here.
I think you already know the answer. But what I'll say is, I started my first company, AAA Event Planning, in my early 20s. I was just about 22. And that company started because my ex business partner and I, who I'm still fantastic friends with to this day, which I'm very proud of because that's not normally the story when
Mm.
people go
Yeah.
their ways to our
Yeah.
company. We were working as event managers at Wayne State University, which is where we both got our undergraduate degrees in Detroit, Michigan. And one day we were disgruntled about our jobs. I don't know why we were
Mm.
disgruntled about our jobs. And we said, we could do this. We could start our own event planning company. And literally, we went down to the Wayne County City County building in downtown Detroit and started our own company and figured it out. And we ran that company for 8 years, lots of lessons, lots of things that didn't go so well, lots of things that went hugely well. But I will say the big shining bright for me, other than, of course, gaining a friendship with my still dear friends to this day, Zim and Marogi, is getting a seed planted in me.
Mm.
I fell in love with the order and the idea of protocol and order,
Mm.
which lives in the world of etiquette. And
Mm.
so after 8 years of operating that business, Opal E Event Planning, I decided that I wanted to dabble in the etiquette space because I was curious
Mm.
about it. I looked around Detroit and I noticed that no one was teaching etiquette to teen girls in a way that I thought mattered. And a way that I thought mattered, it is not me poo-pooing on tea parties and curtsying and all those
Yeah.
formality things that
Yeah.
everybody thinks about over the past week that the queen, normally does. How does etiquette apply to the modern world? How can I use etiquette and protocol to advance me as a young lady from where I am now to where I want to be? And literally, I start doing the work. I just launched the company and built my own curriculum. I happen to have a master's degree in instructional technology, and so I understood how to build curriculum.
Mm. Mm.
Well, about 6 months into doing this work or so, corporations started to call, which was
Mm.
never on the list, was never on.
Mm.
I thought
Mm.
I would be teaching etiquette to teen girls, which I thought was and still is an important thing to do. Well, the Detroit Lions called, and Nike called, and the Department
Wow.
of Defense called, and Deloitte called, and all these companies called wanting etiquette training because they heard about what we were doing.
And
And
how
I
did they hear about what you were doing? Because that seems like the dream, right? You're doing something you enjoy, and then
yeah,
you get more opportunities to do that. So how did that come about? I'm sure you were doing something.
There were a couple things. One is one of the first organizations that we did etiquette training for was the Rhonda Walker Foundation, which is a
Mm.
foundation in Michigan, and a news anchor is the founder of it. And so we ended
Mm.
up having a pretty notable news story in the city of
Mm.
Detroit. And then I had connections from the company that we started, AAA Event Planning, who had
Mm.
followed us. They were
Mm.
me. That was just like, oh, well, what are you doing now? You're no longer doing this. What are you doing? And so word just slowly started to get out. I recognize though that really companies I found weren't necessarily calling because they wanted us to teach people etiquette training. They were calling because they wanted their leaders to be better leaders. It took me a while to recognize that. Now being 10 years in business, we still operated formally as an etiquette company. Easily up to 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, you would still hear me say Scarlet Communications, we teach etiquette, we teach modern etiquette. And now I've recognized after impacting tens of thousands of people all across the
Mm.
globe, talking to companies and seeing where they see our training fit within their organization, that this is much more of a leadership play for them than it was an etiquette play. Probably a few years back, I'll say it's probably been about 3 to 4 years, maybe 3 years back, we've formally refer to ourselves as a leadership consultancy. And of course, etiquette is
Mm.
still a part of the work that we do, but Scarlet is a leadership consultancy.
As a coach, I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking, oh, you got to the deeper issue within. So etiquette was the surface, and then underneath that, the deeper was the leadership.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And it is interesting because I think you're right in that etiquette sort of got me in the door. I think that etiquette can be this feel good thing of
Mm.
course, like who doesn't want to embrace etiquette? But I think
Mm.
the other side of that, to be honest with you, is there are some people who are abrasive about etiquette because depending on which audience you talk to, it could feel like a gatekeeper word. It could feel like
Mm.
have and
Mm.
have nots kind of word. And that's the reason
Mm.
why I am very careful about how we approach etiquette. In
Mm.
our world, etiquette is the accepted code of behavior for particular situations, period. Sometimes I
Mm.
can do this, sometimes I can't. If I'm going to
Mm.
enter into this environment, let me understand the rules and the protocol and make the decision on if I want to roll over there or not. For lots of people, I know because I've had many conversations about how etiquette can feel a little bit stifling, especially for some people in underserved communities and underserved
Mm.
populations are just like, well, that sort of kind of cuts me out of opportunities. And so I make it a point to say, no, 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 by understanding the rules of X place or understanding the protocol of certain places, number one, you can either feel more confident in going to that place,
Mm.
or it can arm you with the confidence to make the decision. I don't want to go there. Like, that's not for me at all.
Mm.
And so I did really start to embrace more of the opportunities around etiquette and able to explain to people like how it can still be for you. But I get it. Etiquette certainly was for many years, it was the door opener. And then other organizations started to see like, okay, this is an interesting maybe starter course, but can we go deeper? Like, can we teach
Mm.
our people about public speaking? Can we teach our people about interpersonal communication? Can we teach our people about negotiation? Like all the things that are underneath it in the leadership
Yeah.
will, but etiquette sort of got the door open for me.
Mm. That's so interesting. And I think about, I was part of a minority internship program called Inroads. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. So etiquette was one of the courses we took, one of the workshops we took, and I still don't think I have it completely down, but etiquette was like something I remember eating a piece of bread just
Yeah.
incorrectly. And one of my fellow inroaders saying, you're not supposed to dip the bread in the butter like that. And I was like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
And I love that lots of people have stories about etiquette that are
Mm.
closely related to dining.
Mm.
And my job is to open the other doors that are around the dining conversation.
Ooh, tell us about these doors.
Well, of course, people are like, okay, dining and forks and knives,
Mm.
but even things along the lines of handshakes and eye contact and name tags. The fact your name tag goes underneath your right shoulder because when you shake hands, your body gravitates to the right side of their body. How you can make people feel warm and welcome, even though for
Mm.
the 15th time, you've forgotten their name, right? For me, because I meet so many people, because my husband is always introducing me to people over and over again, you will very rarely hear me say, it's nice to meet you,
Mm.
unless I know definitively it is my first time meeting that person. Like, I know we have gotten that before.
I see.
I say, nice to see you, almost to
Mm.
everybody,
Mm.
because I've met some people before and I've forgotten their names and they've gotten offended. And I don't want anybody to be offended purely because of a mishap of my memory. There are all these little nuanced things. And of course, they grow greater and greater culturally, depending on where you're at in the world. My desire is that people take their opportunity to embrace protocol and etiquette differently than just this surface kind of, oh, there's a nice little rule. And instead think of it as you giving yourself permission to be a stronger leader, you giving yourself permission to create deeper connections, and even being respectful of the person that for a practice that you may have not even thought of before. Like today's Rosh Hashanah, for example. How many of us see that on our calendar are just like, I don't know, I have no idea. But by opening yourself up to, oh, what's the protocol around that day? How might I honor the person to my left or my right? By just understanding what it is, I just think it opens us up to much more opportunity all around.
And, as you're talking, it makes me think of being open to learning,
Yes.
being open to new experiences.
Which is what life is all about. And I say that from privilege, and not privilege from what I think people typically associate privilege with, but I say that from a mindset of someone who is just open. I get that lots of people aren't open. I can think back to conversations I had with my father when he was alive, or even my mom, about things that required open thinking that they would never be open to. Like, what do you mean you're going snowboarding? What do you mean you're going to launch a company and you're not familiar with this? What do you mean you're going to go meet a friend that you met on the internet that you never talked to before, right? Just these things I think that are more common now. But I do think that for many people, being open is horrifying. It is like, what do you mean you want me to step outside the 4 blocks of the radius of neighborhood I've grew up in my whole life? Like, what do you mean you want me to consider leaving a job that pays me well, quote unquote? Like, what are you talking about? And I think this goes back to the first question that you asked me around that dream job situation. Because I wasn't dreaming of a specific thing earlier, I later dreamt about everything. When I have an idea now, which happens all the time, I will message my assistant and just say, hey, could you put this in the task list? And she knows now that means go into Asana, which is our task management software. And there is an ideas tab, put this in there, because I have lots of ideas and dreams and things that everything I put in there, I know I can get it started. It's just a matter of timing and prioritization. And so back to what you were saying, just about being open, I always encourage people to be open, but I understand that and maybe even you approach it from sure, like, let's give it a whirl. Like, let's give it a try. And some people are just, what do you mean give this a try? But you and I both are going to keep preaching, be open, because I could think about, just to give you one more quick example, for 8 years of building Scarlet, the company that I full-time operate now, I had a corporate job, which some people knew and some people didn't know. And
thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. It's important. It's so important, right? Because some people want to do things and want to start things. And you're just like, how can I quit my job completely and do this? And my answer to you is, maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can figure out how to parallel path this for a while, which is what I did. Well, let me tell you, and let me tell your viewership and your listenership how this happened. When we moved to the DC area from Detroit about 10 years ago now, I received a message in my LinkedIn box that said, hey, are you open to having a conversation about an event management consulting position? Now, when I moved here, I had no intention on getting a job at all. I was just going to grow Scarlet. Well, me remaining curious and having a conversation said, well, sure, like, I'll have the conversation with you. But what was happening on my insides is a little bit of turmoil. And let me tell you, because I had decided I was going to do this position full time. I was going to do Scarlet full time. I wasn't going to get a job. Well, my cousin, who worked at Coca-Cola at the time, he had a coach. He had a business coach, which 8 years ago, I didn't feel as strongly about coaching as I do now. Then he and I grew up in the same house. His mother raised me. And this coach, he told me, I said, well, what is the investment for this coach? He was like, it's a couple $100s an hour. And I was like, what? We grew up in the same house. Like, what are you talking about? You're paying somebody $200 an hour for advice. What are you doing? Right. But he was like, I'll pay for it. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I talked to this person and I was telling them the same thing I'm telling you. I think I want to pursue this. I think I should take this conversation, but I really want to stay full time with my business. I don't know what I should do. What should I do? I was going back and forth. And he said to me, it sounds like you need to make a decision. And if you don't like that decision, make another decision. And I was like, okay.
That's what I'm paying you, a couple $100.
Okay, to help me think through, because it's true. It's true. Like, so many times.
True. Very true.
Spend all this time spinning our wheels. Should I do this?
Yes.
You could have done it, decided that you liked it or you didn't like it, and moved the heck on. But I spent 8 years at AARP. The last role that I had at AARP was actually the vice president of startup programming. The reason why I share that is because that last role of mine that I actually left willingly, and I actually loved my job. I loved my team. I just saw them a few weeks ago. They all came to my book launch event. It was so nice to
Wow.
see them. That job was just a clean memory of the fact that it lined up directly with my life thesis. Like I could have
Mm,
continued doing that forever. I just
mm,
love that work. But I do think that there is a time when we should give ourselves permission to do the things that we most feel like we are connected with and the spaces that we feel like we're the most impactful in. And it was just purely a choice, just purely a choice. But I'd like to be transparent about that because I recognize that so many people who are on the journey of starting things
yes.
they want to do and scaling, you have other things that you are trying to manage or that you are managing at the same time, a family, a
Mhm.
job, you're a caregiver for your parents. And my recommendation always is get started, let your questions get answered in the action,
Mm,
and remember that your journey doesn't need to look like my journey or your journey or anyone else's journey. It can look like the journey that you feel good about. And so I'm happy that that's welcoming to your listenership and readership because it's only one you. There are 7.7 billion people out here, and there's no one that's just like you. So why couldn't you do it in a way that feels good to you
mm,
without necessarily quitting everything else that's going on in your life? So I'm
mm.
hoping that's helpful to your listenership.
Well, very. And we talk about this all the time on the podcast. Media or social media, or it seems to glamorize you quit your job and you go do what you love. And the reality is that from what I've seen from people that I've interviewed on the podcast or followed along really closely, is that there's always a safety net, whether that means a part time job, a full time job, a partner who's supporting us through the process, whatever it might be. And it's more measured risk testing, experimenting, once we've built a client base or once we've tested out whether that's even what we actually want to do. So I think that's very generous of you to share. I think that's going to resonate with people. So thank you for that. A few things I wanted to highlight. You said you're a curious person, and
Yes.
that really lines up to kind of the sense I get from you. And earlier you were talking about being open. And I think one of the things that I want to highlight too that I've observed about being open to discomfort or new situations is that it takes courage and it takes the willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed about you is that the curiosity and the willingness to learn probably outweighs that for you. It doesn't mean that you don't feel fear, maybe you're feeling maybe a little vulnerable, whatever it might be, if it's a brand new situation, but you're willing to, in the pursuit of learning, in the pursuit of curiosity, in the pursuit of possibilities, you're
Yeah.
willing to step into that space.
I am willing to embrace discomfort. I will say out of the 100% of the time that I am living my life, I'm easily uncomfortable 60% of the time. And I'm okay with that because
Mm,
I embrace the fact that many of the things that I've done in my life, I've done them for the first time and without someone guiding me through the process step by step. When I started a company, there was no one in my family who had ever started a company. When I wrote my first book, I did not have anyone in my circle who had written a book. When I joined my first corporate board, there was nobody in my circle,
mm,
especially a Black woman in her 30s at
mm,
that time who had joined
mm,
the corporate board. When I got my trademarks, like all these things I was doing and I was figuring them out. But even despite that, if somebody's
mm,
listening, they're just like, well, I haven't done any of those things. Okay, take this. None of us have been on Earth before. We are figuring this thing out. Like, this is not
mm,
our third time visiting a planet, and we're like, oh, I did this on Earth. We're uncomfortable. I think that we spend a lot of time making ourselves feel bad for being uncomfortable about something that we've never experienced or we've never done before. And then, unfortunately, that discomfort then really transfers into us not doing something else we want to do or being
mm.
fearful because of that feeling. I am
Yes.
constantly battling anxiety. I was formally diagnosed with anxiety when I was 19, which to
Mm,
most people is crazy, right? Because I'm on stages a lot. But
mm,
I just have gotten to the point in my career, and it's taken me a while to get here, that I digest anxiety a little bit different. Number one, because it's always here. I've been
mm,
on 2 interviews today. I've taught a class today. I have a couple of
mm,
client meetings. Like it's always, but at the top of every single one of those engagements, whether it's in person or personal, whether I'm talking to someone who's a junior level person or C-suite person, there's a level of anxiety that I have and that I'm managing through because I don't like to waste people's time. I have this deep
mm,
sense of, if you're with me, you are giving me something that you will never get back. You will never get this time with me back. And so for me, that evokes a level of anxiety that's just like, I hope I'm producing. I hope that I'm doing value. But you know what? I accept that because I practice, I research, I do what I'm supposed to do. And so I walk into a conversation as prepared as I possibly can. And then I'll say, you know what? Every time before I get on a conversation or an interview, I feel anxiety and I acknowledge it. I'll say, oh, there you are, anxiety. Looks like you're back again. This is probably going to be a great conversation. Instead of me fearing it, like, oh gosh, I wish it goes away. Let me just use it. It's renting space in my head for free. You're not going to just squat here in my mind. I'm gonna use you, right?
You got to pay rent.
You got to do something for me. So I do that. And then I have a series, what I call almost like a cocktail of anxiety related things that I do, from managing my caffeine intake. I have tea here, but you better believe that it's caffeine free. Like all these things that I do to minimize my anxiety. But back to the question originally, I stay curious, but I also embrace discomfort. I know that I will be fearful in some situations. I know that I will feel like I don't have things figured out. And I accept that that is okay. It's okay for me to embrace that a lot of my questions are going to get answered in the action. I fully embrace that. It's not that I'm not going to do my homework. It's not that I'm not going to study. It's not that I'm not going to practice, but I'm not going to be on this pursuit of perfection because it's not possible. I'm going to do as much as I can do, and then I'm going to execute. And so I do remain curious. And I would say the curiosity even aligns with the previous conversation we were having about the previous job. If I wouldn't have taken that opportunity, I never would have served as someone's chief of staff. I never would have eventually become the vice president of startup programming. I never would have had the opportunity to source fintech and health tech startups from all over the country, and all from curiosity. And now a lot of the companies we work with have called me back. I'm doing a signing at that company in a few weeks. Just things that if I would have just said, no, I don't do that anymore. Like, that's not what I'm into. If I would have just said that and closed that door, a lot of these conversations that I'm having right now probably wouldn't be happening. I just think by remaining curious and giving yourself permission to just experience things that you never imagined before, but knowing that you can say no. Like, I could have taken that conversation and say, you know what, I don't want to do this. But that's not how it shook out. I thought that it was interesting. So remaining curious, I have to say, I've never said this before out loud, but I think remaining curious is one of my superpowers. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that on me.
You're welcome. Well, tell me, Jacqueline, what do you think has been your learnings from being curious? I know you kind of talked about it now with kind of what's come up for you now in terms of opportunities. What has been the result of you embracing discomfort, of you embracing that curiosity? So if someone's listening and says, I don't know, I really don't want to be uncomfortable, what happens on the other side of that, do you think? We don't die, hopefully.
No, I'm still here. I'm still alive. By embracing discomfort, I will say there are two categories here. I'll say by embracing curiosity, there are two categories. And I'll say the wins and the challenges category. Let's just be honest about it all. In the wins category, I believe that it has opened up doors for me to see the unseeable, experience things that I never imagined. A lot of the roles that I had, quite frankly, were created for me purely out of me just staying curious. People are like, I like you. I like your work ethic. I'm going to keep you here. Your curiosity, not, oh, I went to school for public relations and instructional technology. Create something for me in that area or else. Like, and it would have been or else I was out of there. Right. And so I think that it has just allowed me to experience things that I never would have experienced before. It also, I'm not sure if the curiosity has caused this to happen, or this tool / approach that I'm going to tell you about has helped the curiosity to happen. I am constantly reframing, constantly in my mind. I am constantly looking at a situation and saying to myself, okay, here is a situation, but if this changes a little bit, or if I think of it a little bit differently, or if I sit back and think of it from someone else's perspective, how much different I assess this situation or this opportunity? And I'll give you a prime example of why I have to reframe consistently. I am what you call a catastrophizer. There are several words that fall into this realm of things that you do by default that can sort of put you in a bad place. Sometimes it's filtering, sometimes it's overgeneralization. one of those things for me is catastrophizing. What that means is that, let's just say if you call me next week out of the blue, totally has nothing to do with this podcast. You're just like, Jacqueline, I just need to speak with you for a little while. My mind first is going to think, oh my gosh, she got terrible feedback about my interview and she wants to tell me about it. My mind goes full negative first. It goes fully like the world is burning down and it's over. And I know where that comes from. And I'm going to make this next statement because I think a lot of times we skip this part of learning about ourselves. Me having that default approach, it comes from childhood. It comes from the relationship that I had with one of my parents where there was a lot of disappointment. And so I trained myself to expect disappointment because it was easier to get over that than expecting greatness and then being disappointed. And so now that has followed me into adulthood. It has. And I'm not sure if I'll ever shake it. But you know what I have been able to do? I have been able to lessen the time. So if you call me next week, my default is probably going to be, oh my gosh, she got feedback and she's never going to ask me to be on the show again. Like that's going to be the default for like 4 seconds. And then it's like, wait, that doesn't make any. But that is my default. And so I think that I'm not sure if me being able to reframe, especially knowing my default with overreacting sometimes internally about things, makes me more curious, or if my curiosity helps me to reframe. I'm not sure, but I think they're in the same will together. So that's, I think, the pluses of staying curious. The minuses, or the things that you should be aware of with remaining curious, is I find it impossible to act on all things. And the way that I keep myself from acting on all things and to chasing all the ambulances and to looking at all the shiny objects is by staying true to my life thesis, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. For me, when opportunities get presented to me, when previous job opportunities, training opportunities present, I can quickly run it through my life thesis filter. I can quickly say, Jacqueline, will this thing help you to help people start the things they want to do or elevate to the next level of leadership? Yes or no? I can quickly decide. I don't have to go back and forth. I don't have to pay a coach, even though I believe in coaches and I pay them for many things. But
Thank you.
Absolutely. But I don't necessarily have to. For that juncture, maybe I don't have to. And so I think that everyone, independent of if you are entry level, and I'm happy to see that more companies are starting to get hip to offering coaching opportunities at different levels at an organization. Whether you're entry level, you're a mid-level manager, you're a senior level manager, you're a CEO, whether you are operating your household, you haven't quite entered the workforce yet. This idea of having a life thesis, North Star, mission statement, however you want to quantify it or qualify it in your life, is so valuable because it does help make decisions on, well, how curious am I going to be about this? Or I took the conversation, am I going to take it? Yes or no? Have I ran it through my life thesis? And so curiosity is essential at the human level, but I'll say one other thing that a little bit in left field, but nonetheless valuable, I believe. Curiosity from the corporate realm is even more important. And I say that especially as we think about the last few years, and especially as we think about where we're at right now with companies making direct decisions on come back to the office or not, right? And not just that, but just how for so many years, companies chose to do the same things over and over and over again and expecting continuous committed customers. And you and I can both think of companies that no longer exist that we used to shop at, the Sears of the world, the Blockbusters of the world, because maybe they were lacking the ability to remain a little bit more curious. Just imagine if Blockbuster would have been more curious about digital entertainment in terms of not physically having to get a disc or physically having to get a VHS. Ooh, like would Netflix really be here? And so it's not just us remaining curious. I think it's also entities that are led by us remaining more curious to make sure that they're stable, they're innovative, and they're staying at the cutting edge of really what customers want and what customers need.
And it made me think of also, again, this theme of being open to new things. And also what came up for me was a little bit of humility, or something like Blockbuster thought, I got it. I don't need to whatever, or even some other companies that are no longer around. And same kind of humble in that there's new things, there's new opportunities.
Humility is something, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that management of humility and ego, ooh, I think I am certainly not above someone who's had to keep their ego in check. The most relevant example of that I have to go back to is the cover of my books, both of them. Look at the covers of both of my books. I am not on either of those covers, but my ego did not agree with that. Okay. My ego was like, what are you doing? This is your work. There are not a lot of women, Black women particularly, are regarded for writing leadership works. And for my second book, having a publishing deal, show people what's possible. And not even just that, my ego was also saying, but it's your book. Come on, you should be on the front. And you have to pause yourself and say, does that matter? Does that piece that my ego is scratching for, is that really going to help me to fulfill my life thesis or get me to where I want to be? And I think about that not only in something as tangible as my book, my newest book in particular, but also think about it in terms of how people lead themselves and lead teams. And in that, I recognized many times, but I definitely recognized as I was exiting my corporate role, how important it was for me to be a follower as a leader. There's sometimes, as you are being a leader on your journey, that taking the back seat and following and giving other people the push that they need to lead is really where you need to be in that moment. Because I can recall, and I think that that's relevant it shows up in your personal life, whether you have a child and it's just like, okay, you're behind and push them ahead. But in the workplace, and I get it, many times we want to shine, we want to get those accolades, we want the promotion. But I can think clearly when I was preparing to leave my role, a series of unfortunate events happened months before I left my role that almost forced me to have to follow. My father unexpectedly passed away, and then I contracted COVID. And it was at a period of time where there was a lot of stuff going on in my role. We were producing a huge pitch competition. There were lots of things going on. But in that moment, I knew I was leaving. I knew in a few months that I was giving myself permission to leave. And so I had a choice. Jacqueline, you're either going to shoehorn your presence into this, or you're going to play the backseat and let these other people who you have been championing, leading for years, let them play the front seat. One, because they can. Number two, because they're going to need to do this. You're not going to be able to be called on, right? And they need to have the confidence to say, okay, usually when I'm in a pickle, I can call Jacqueline, she can get it done, right? But I knew I was not going to be there. And I couldn't tell them that because it just wasn't the appropriate time for me to make that announcement. But I do think that so much of leading in our lives requires us to know when we need to stop trying to be out front and let other people lead. And more importantly, give them their opportunity to make the mistakes, give them their opportunity to go on their own journey. And so I had to silence the ego, silence the here's what you should be doing, and you should be in the remarks, and let whomever else do their thing so they can do it time and time again.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And that actually makes me think of, I want to make sure we touch on your book. Can you tell us about your book, how it came to be, what you're sharing in the book, what you think the audience might benefit from hearing?
Absolutely. I hope that for those of you who can see, you can see my smile from ear to ear. For those of you who can hear, I hope you can hear my smile from ear to ear. This book, the development of my second book, The Unexpected Leader, Discovering the Leader Within You, has been a very enjoyable journey. And I will hit you with some of the highlights. At the end of the day, my wish for this work is that people pick it up, they read it, and that they rediscover themselves. Because so many times we go on autopilot in our lives. We get 168 hours in a week. Most of us can't tell you what we've been spending this time on. We make on average 35,000 decisions every day. We can't tell you what we've been spending these decisions on because just autopilot. And then we do all these things throughout our lives, raising children, planning the girls' trip, planning the boys' trip, delegating things out to our children, all these things that technically are leadership qualities and characteristics that once we get to the front door of our workplace, or once it gets to a point where it's time for us to give ourselves permission to start things, we say, I'm not qualified for that. Like, I don't know how to delegate. I don't know how to communicate. And you've been doing this stuff for decades. And so really what I want the book to be is a tool for people to see themselves as leaders at multiple steps in their journey. And we look at leadership in 4 different levels. There's self-leadership, leadership of others, leadership of communities, and leadership of movements. You didn't hear anything about role, position, status, or title in any of that stuff. You didn't even hear me talk about a company in there, because there are people that I know who don't have corporate jobs, have barely had a corporate job, and are dynamic leaders. And so I would love for this to be a reference for people and a tool to help them get from where they are now to where they want to be next, but more importantly, to help discover, define, and refine the leader within them. I will say, though, just as a point of journey, because we've talked a lot about journey and being curious and all those things, I wrote and released my first book in 2017. It was a self-published book. And I knew that I wanted to go on the journey of having a publishing partnership with a company, which ultimately ended up being Wiley Publishing. I probably started writing the proposal for this book in maybe 2020. And you know how I started writing this proposal? I Googled book writing proposal because I was like, well, I don't know, like, I'm not sure where you get these proposals from. So let me just Google book writing proposal. And so I downloaded a proposal and I started answering the questions. Did I know them to be the right questions? No. Did I know if I was answering them 100% correct? No. But I just kept filling it out. And I literally every week was spending time working on this proposal until a point in 2021 when I was talking to a friend of mine who had a connection there and said, hey, do you want an introduction? And that's literally how it happened. And then I had a conversation and the rest is history. And so I bring this up because I think that while there are some things that I know a little bit more of, there are some things that I've had some experience in doing over the past almost 20 years of being an entrepreneur, a small business owner. There are some things that I don't know, but I'm going to do what I know and take some action on those things moving forward. Because it's not like when I want to start something, there's this magic box of all the answers that I go into and I get all the answers and someone else doesn't. That's not how the thing works. I just start with what I know. I execute on what I know to the best of my ability. And I believe that your questions get answered in the action. Then someone else says, oh, you've done this. Well, you should maybe try this next or try something that no one else has tried before. And so I tell that story. And actually, I probably haven't told it as much as I should because it is a true manifestation of how things get done. There is no secret, perfect project management platform that's given me all the answers that it doesn't give someone else or vice versa. Like it's just pure action. That's what the book is. That's what I'm hoping that the book will be. And that is truly how the book came to be.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I 100% agree. And I think what I see in coaching conversations is that a lot of the times we want to have the path completely figured out before we start taking action.
Yes.
Right. We think if I have the whole thing, if I sit here behind my computer and figure it all out before I get started, then I will be successful. And it just keeps us stuck. It keeps us paralyzed. It keeps us from moving forward. So I love that you highlighted that because I think that is the secret. That is the secret.
And I have to say too, I have now learned much more about falling in love with the process because I actually have no clue what an outcome is going to be. I don't. I had no clue what the outcome of this book was going to be. I have no clue of what the outcome of many of the things I'm going to be. I have a vision. I can visualize lots of things. But you know what? I'm going to have to go through the process. So let me just find a way to enjoy this process since a lot of times the process is longer and more enjoyable than the outcome, or it can be. Like I think about when I was planning the book launch event. The book launch event was a massive event. Over 100 people. Maker's Mark was a sponsor, and we had bottles, all these things that were just magical. This event was 3 hours. We spent months preparing for this day. And as I look back, I really enjoyed the process of making it come together. I enjoyed the day. I wouldn't say that I enjoyed the day, but enjoying the process or finding ways to just enjoy the journey of getting somewhere will get you more joy, I think, than waiting until the end because you really don't really know what's going to happen on the other side. So try to enjoy the process as well.
That is a great reminder for all of us.
Yes, and I know it's hard.
Always, yes.
I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard.
It's a great reminder. I think it's going to resonate with so many people. And I think it also makes me think of that all we can really control is what we do. We can never control the outcome as hard as we may want. So letting go of that and just focusing on what can I do next and how can I enjoy this moment instead of waiting until the future 3-hour event. That's when I'll feel joy because So
you might not.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear what your perspective is for someone who's listening, who's maybe feeling a little unhappy at work. they're sitting at their desk listening to this and thinking, loving what Jacqueline's talking about, stepping into action.
Yeah.
And they're feeling stuck. They're feeling like this work or how I'm living my life right now, or whatever it might be, is not
Mhm.
working for me. What would you say to that person?
A few things. The first
Mm,
thing I would say is I want you to remember that you have more power at your
mm,
fingertips to make change and to make adjustments than you are allowing yourself to believe. This next statement is not me asking anyone to quit their jobs. Let me be very clear about that. But I do want to remind people that you can maneuver, you can move, you can shift, you can change, you can adjust, you can incorporate new things, you can purge things out, right? Hopefully, it's not like a family member. We have a lot more power in
mm,
our realm than we really allow ourselves to realize. But I know that for some people can feel a little bit like, but how? Tell me how now, Jacqueline. And let me tell you a few things. First, is I really do want to encourage you, or everyone. I want to encourage you as well as a wonderful interviewer here today and everybody who's in your audience to take some action on creating your life thesis. The life thesis document, which essentially just asks you 4 quick questions. What keeps positively showing up in your life? What are you undeniably good at?
mm,
With judgment, fear, or self-doubt, what kind of leader do you want to be? What really moves and inspires you? It's just 4 questions. They're available on my website. It's pretty easy to get to. Those 4 questions, by literally asking those 4 questions, answering those 4 questions, it allows you to like get a quick glimpse of this is in a nutshell me. This is what moves me. This is what inspires me. This is this thing that keeps positively showing up in my life. And it helps you to distill your answer down to this is my life thesis. This is what
mm,
I want to be remembered for, what I want to focus on. When you have that clear in your world, it's a lot easier, or it should be a lot easier for you to make decisions, for you to decide, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And so I do encourage people to go and create their life thesis so that you have a clearer understanding about who you are, what you
mm.
want, what keeps positively showing up in your life that you actually might not really be remembering. This next one I know is going to make people uncomfortable, but hopefully for the good. We love to hear what we want to hear. I encourage everyone to embrace the magic of feedback and to get people in your circle that are going to do one of 4 things. And I encourage you to have 4 different types of mentors, 4 different types of board members on your personal board of directors. Someone that is going to educate you, someone that is going to coach you,
Mm,
someone that is going to challenge you, and someone that is going to cheerlead you. And
mm,
in those 4 quadrants, you have the opportunity to get feedback. And here is why
mm,
I say this. Sometimes our opportunities are literally right on the other side of someone being candid and open and honest with us
mm,
and
mm,
saying, hey, I love you. I appreciate you. I think you do fantastic work, but I need you to step it up in this area. Or, hey, you need to be a little bit more educated on this. You're not coming across as clear and as astute as you should as someone in
mm,
the role. And sometimes we will work with people, or people will work with others, or leaders will have subordinates, and they never give them that clear, concise feedback.
mm.
And someone's wondering, like, well, why am I not getting elevated? And it is because no one's giving you the really candid feedback that you need to get to your next level. If your boss isn't giving it to you, if your spouse isn't giving it to you, seek it from other places, because at the end of the day, your leadership growth and development is your responsibility. I know we want to think that our boss is supposed to do it and our jobs are supposed to do it, but that's our responsibility. We are self leaders of ourselves. And so I can go on and on and on about this, but I do want to say, number 1, realize that you have more power than you think that you have, right? Make sure you create your life thesis, seek feedback, but most importantly,
Mm.
please do give yourself permission to see yourself as a self leader and start down your leadership journey. Oh,
Thank you. That was wonderful, beautiful. I'm motivated. I'm inspired.
great. My job is done here.
I think listeners are going to be so inspired. And again, this concept of stepping into this discomfort.
Yes.
Sometimes feedback can be a little uncomfortable, and that's okay, 'cause that's where we grow.
And I will say, just, as a point of like real and humanness, is for anyone who looks me up, feel free to drop me in the Google box, the Bing box, whatever search engines are out here these days. You will notice that for the majority of the ways that I teach and photograph, you will see me sleeveless. And this is not by accident. This is by design. It is because
Mm,
when I get nervous and anxiety is peaking, Guess what happens for Jacqueline, who's on a stage, has a platform? She sweats. Very like literally today, I have a tank top right underneath this and a cloak to be professional. But I just want you to know that the discomfort, the temporary discomfort that happens in our feelings and in our minds, it is not more important than the impact that you're supposed to make with your life. And I remind myself of that when I feel a little bit of sweat coming on, when I get a little bit nervous, it's like, take a breath. All right, your impact is important here. The feelings around it will go away. And that is how I get through it.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, where can people find your book? Where can people learn more about you and your work?
Thank you for asking. The easiest way to learn more about me and my work is easiest on my website at jacquelineMbaker.com. If you want direct access to how to get the book, it's at jacquelineMbaker.com/unexpected. And then also I'm on most of your social media channels, with LinkedIn being a main one. And I also spend quite a bit of transparent time over on Instagram too at Magical Jax. That's Magical JAX.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.